Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that almost every major decision in your life
is tied to a contract you signed.
Your education, your home, your car,
even the government that rules your country.
All of them connected by the same invisible thread: debt.
But here's the strange part. Debt isn't just something people use when they are short of money. It is something the modern financial system actively creates, expands, and depends on. In fact, the global economy runs on it.
Banks profit from it.
Governments rely on it.
Corporations grow because of it.
And the deeper you look into history,
the clearer one thing becomes.
Debt didn't accidentally become the center of the financial world.
It was built that way.
Over centuries, what began as a simple promise between two people slowly transformed into the most profitable product ever created.
A system capable of financing wars, shaping governments,
and quietly transferring wealth from millions of people
to a small group of creditors.
To understand how this happened,
we have to go back to the very beginning.
Debt, in its simplest form, is a promise. You borrow today
and agree to pay tomorrow. But in that promise hides the core of financial control.
Interest. Charging interest turns the future into profit. For thousands of years, societies struggled with this idea. Ancient Mesopotamians recorded debts on clay tablets, but they also periodically wiped them clean in what were called
debt jubilees, because leaders understood something important.
When too many citizens were trapped in obligations,
the system itself could collapse. The same idea appears in the Hebrew Bible. Debt forgiveness was commanded every 50 years.
The logic was simple.
Debt was dangerous.
Left unchecked,
it could enslave entire populations. But as centuries passed, something changed.
Instead of erasing debt, powerful elites began learning how to use it, how to control it,
and eventually,
how to weaponize it.
In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church officially banned usury,
the charging of excessive interest.
Yet merchants and bankers
found ways around it. They disguised loans as trade contracts, or created complex credit instruments that looked like anything but a loan.
By the Renaissance, powerful banking families like the Medici in Florence
built empires not on land or armies, but on lending.
They financed kings, popes, and merchants,
and in return received not only money, but political leverage.
Debt was becoming more than a financial product. It was the engine of power.
The real transformation came in the 17th century,
with the rise of state debt.
When the Dutch Republic fought for independence from Spain,
it raised money by selling bonds to its own citizens.
Investors could buy government debt,
receive interest payments,
and trade those bonds like property. Suddenly, war was no longer limited
by the gold or silver in a king's treasury.
It could be financed indefinitely.
By selling the future, the Dutch perfected this model, and soon England copied it.
Formalized national debt as a permanent institution.
Instead of borrowing from individual lenders,
the state borrowed from a central bank that issued notes backed by those loans.
For the first time, a government didn't just raise debt in emergencies. It lived on it, rolling it over endlessly.
And the bankers who managed this debt
became indispensable to the crown.
Debt had graduated from private contracts
to the very foundation of state power. The profits were enormous.
Lending to governments was the safest bet in the financial world,
because governments could raise taxes to pay their creditors.
Wars that once would have bankrupted kings
could now be financed indefinitely.
And those wars, in turn,
expanded empires, opened new markets, and created more opportunities for debt. It was a perfect loop. The more nations fought, the more they borrowed.
And the more they borrowed,
the richer their creditors became. By the 18th and 19th centuries,
The bond markets in London, Paris, and Amsterdam
were the beating heart of global finance.
Armies marched.
Ships sailed. Colonies were conquered, all on borrowed money.
But this wasn't just about nations.
As industrial capitalism spread,
Ordinary people were drawn into the cycle.
Railroads, factories, and infrastructure projects
Were built on credit,
financed through bonds and bank loans. Workers earned wages.
From companies funded by debt.
and then they themselves borrowed to buy homes, tools,
And eventually, consumer goods. Debt seeped into every layer
of economic life.
By the 20th century, debt wasn't just a tool of governments or tycoons. It had become the everyday product.
Sold to the masses.
Mortgages, car loans, credit cards, student debt. The entire architecture of modern life was constructed to normalize borrowing
As the default condition of existence. And here's the hidden genius, or the hidden cruelty,
of it all.
Debt doesn't just create profit once. Every interest payment
Is a transfer of wealth.
from the debtor to the creditor, from the many to the few.
repeated month after month, year after year.
Unlike a product you buy once and use,
Debt is designed to be permanent, to lock you into a cycle of payments
That never truly ends.
A house bought with a 30-year mortgage
Will cost 2 or 3 times its sticker price.
a credit card bill, rolled over month to month, can grow faster than your ability to pay it.
What began as a promise becomes a trap.
Debt, then, is not just a financial arrangement.
It is the most successful business model
In history, it requires no factory, no inventory.
no raw materials,
It generates wealth,
out of time itself.
and the ones who understood this earliest, the merchants of Amsterdam,
The bankers of London
the financiers of Wall Street, became the architects.
of the modern financial system.
And this system doesn't just manage debt.
It manufactures it.
It expands it.
And ultimately, it depends on it.
To survive,
By the middle of the 20th century,
Debt had stopped being a tool used only in emergencies.
and had become the lifeblood of the global financial system.
Institutionalized this reality.
The International Monetary Fund
And the World Bank.
Were founded to lend money to nations in crisis or development.
But behind the lofty rhetoric,
Was a simple mechanism. Debt as discipline.
countries could borrow.
But only on terms dictated by their creditors. The IMF began attaching structural adjustment conditions
To its loans, entire national economies
were told what to cut.
what to privatize.
and how to reorder their budgets. Debt wasn't just profitable. It became a lever of political control. Nations that borrowed too much found their sovereignty compromised, their policies rewritten,
Not in their own capitals.
but in Washington or Basel. At the same time,
Banks discovered a way.
to sell debt directly to households,
Mortgages,
car loans, installment plans, and credit cards transformed borrowing into a consumer product. Debt was no longer rare or shameful. It became the normal way to participate in prosperity. By the 1970s and 1980s, the consequences of this system began to appear. Developing countries across Latin America, Africa, and Asia had borrowed heavily. When interest rates rose sharply, under Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker, these nations suddenly found themselves unable to service their loans. When Mexico announced it could not pay, the solution was more loans under harsher terms. Countries borrowed to repay old debts, losing more economic control with every cycle. Meanwhile, in developed economies,
The financial industry began transforming debt
into tradable products.
Mortgages, corporate loans,
and other obligations.
were bundled into securities.
And sold globally.
Debt itself
Became a commodity.
and this process.
Reached its breaking point.
in 2008.
Mortgage-backed securities collapsed and triggered the worst financial crisis in decades.
Governments stepped in to rescue the banks.
While millions of people lost homes, jobs, and savings.
Yet, after the crisis, debt did not shrink.
It expanded even further.
Today, global debt exceeds $300 trillion, more than 3 times the size of the world economy.
Debt has become so normalized that most people never question it.
Student loans, mortgages, credit cards, government deficits. The entire modern economy runs on borrowed money.
Every interest payment transfers wealth.
From borrowers to lenders.
Over time, this concentrates wealth at the top of the financial system.
And as central banks explore digital currencies, the next evolution of this system is already taking shape.
Programmable money.
Automated lending decisions. And financial control embedded directly into code.
Debt is not just a financial tool.
It is the most profitable product ever created. A product that turns time itself into money.
And the deeper you understand it,
The clearer the pattern becomes.
From ancient clay tablets,
To modern derivatives markets.
debt has always enriched the creditor.
Burdened the debtor.
And reshaped the world.
In favor of those who control the flow of money.
And perhaps the most remarkable part of all,
is that we are taught to celebrate it.
to call it progress.
And to mistake borrowing for prosperity.
If this gave you a new perspective,
Hit subscribe.
in this channel,
History doesn't entertain, it warns.
And we're here.
to listen